The autumn sun cast long shadows across the small town of Cedar Falls as 8-year-old Emma Martinez clutched her grandmother's weathered hand. The town square buzzed with unusual excitement, filled with more people than Emma had ever seen in her quiet hometown. Campaign banners fluttered in the crisp October breeze, and the sound of a growing crowd echoed off the old brick buildings that lined Main Street. Emma's grandmother, Maria, had insisted they come early to get a good spot. "This is history, mija," she whispered to her granddaughter, adjusting the small pink ribbon in Emma's dark curls. "Someday you'll tell your own children about this day." Emma didn't fully understand what all the fuss was about, but she could feel the energy in the air. People around them held signs, wore red hats, and spoke in excited whispers about the man who was coming to their little town. The stage had been set up in front of the old courthouse, the same building where Emma's great-grandfather had once worked as a janitor decades ago. American flags hung from every lamppost, and a small army of security personnel moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Emma watched them with wide eyes, wondering why so many serious-looking people in dark suits were needed for what her grandmother called a town meeting. As the crowd grew thicker, Emma found herself pressed closer to the metal barriers that separated the audience from the stage. She was small enough to squeeze between the adults, and before long she was right at the front, her small hands gripping the cold metal rail. Behind her, she could hear adults discussing politics, the economy, and things that seemed impossibly complicated to her young mind. But Emma wasn't thinking about any of that. For the past 3 months, ever since her mother had been diagnosed with cancer, Emma had been asking everyone the same question. She had asked her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, who had given her a gentle hug but no real answer. She had asked Pastor Williams at their little church, who had quoted Bible verses that were too difficult for her to understand. She had even asked the mailman, Mr. Peterson, who had simply shrugged and said some questions were too big for him. The question that burned in Emma's heart was simple yet profound. Why doesn't God answer my prayers? Every night for months, she had knelt beside her bed, folded her small hands, and begged God to make her mother better. She had promised to be good, to help with chores, to never fight with her little brother again. But her mother kept getting sicker, losing her beautiful hair to chemotherapy, and spending more days in the hospital than at home. Emma's faith, once as solid as the old oak tree in their backyard, had begun to waver. The adults in her life offered comfort, but none of them seemed to have the answer she desperately needed. Her grandmother had suggested they pray together, but even Maria's strong faith couldn't ease the doubt growing in Emma's young heart. As the crowd continued to swell around them, Emma noticed a group of photographers and news reporters setting up their equipment near the stage. Their cameras looked enormous to her, like mechanical monsters with long black noses pointed toward the empty podium. She wondered if these people had answers to big questions, or if they just asked them. The October air grew cooler as the afternoon wore on, and Emma pulled her small jacket tighter around her shoulders. Her grandmother bought her a small American flag from a vendor, and Emma waved it half-heartedly, her mind still occupied with thoughts of her mother lying in the hospital bed across town. The doctors had said the treatment was going well, but Emma had learned that adults sometimes said things to make children feel better, even when those things weren't completely true. A woman standing next to them noticed Emma's thoughtful expression and smiled down at her. "Are you excited to see the president?" she asked kindly. Emma nodded politely, though she wasn't entirely sure what a president did or why it was important. All she knew was that this man was supposedly very powerful, important enough that their entire town had shut down for his visit. "Do you think he knows about God?" Emma asked the woman suddenly, her question catching both the stranger and her grandmother off guard. The woman exchanged a meaningful look with Maria before answering carefully. "I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" Emma shrugged, not wanting to explain the heavy burden she carried in her small heart. Instead, she turned her attention back to the stage, where workers were making final adjustments to the microphones and podium. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small hope began to form. If this man was as important as everyone said, maybe he would have the answer she had been searching for. Maybe he could explain why God seemed so quiet when she needed him most. The crowd's energy reached a fever pitch as black SUVs began arriving at the far end of the square. Emma stood on her tiptoes, trying to see over the sea of adult bodies around her. Her small flag still clutched in one hand, while the other maintained its grip on the metal barrier. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to have a conversation that would change not only her own understanding of faith, but touch the heart of one of the most powerful men in the world. The moment Donald Trump stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers so loud that Emma had to cover her ears. The man was taller than she had expected, his blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight as he waved to the assembled crowd. He wore a dark suit and red tie, and when he smiled, Emma could see why so many people seemed excited to see him. Trump began his speech with his usual energy, discussing jobs, the economy, and promises to make America great again. But Emma found her attention drifting. The words seemed too big, too complicated for her 8-year-old mind to grasp. Instead, she studied his face, looking for something she couldn't quite name. Her grandmother had always told her that you could tell a lot about a person by looking in their eyes, and Emma was trying to see if this important man might understand her question. As Trump continued speaking, occasionally pointing to different sections of the crowd, Emma noticed something that surprised her. Despite all the cheering and applause, there were moments when his expression seemed almost sad, as if he carried his own heavy thoughts. It reminded her of how her mother looked sometimes when she thought no one was watching during the quiet, moments between treatments when the brave smile would slip from her face. The speech went on for nearly an hour, covering topics that sailed right over Emma's head. She heard words like policies and administration and infrastructure, but none of it seemed to address the questions that really mattered to her. When would her mother get better? Why did good people have to suffer? And most importantly, why did God seem so far away when she needed him most? As Trump began wrapping up his prepared remarks, something unexpected happened. He paused mid-sentence, his gaze sweeping across the front row of the crowd. For just a moment, his eyes met Emma's, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. It wasn't the confident, powerful look she had expected. Instead, she saw something almost vulnerable, as if he too knew what it felt like to have questions without answers. "You know," Trump said, departing from his prepared speech, "sometimes the most important conversations aren't about politics at all." The crowd grew quieter, sensing a shift in his tone. "Sometimes they're about the things that really matter. Family, faith, the questions that keep us up at night." Emma's grandmother squeezed her hand gently, noticing how intently her granddaughter was now listening. The little girl's eyes had never left Trump's face, and Maria could see something building in Emma's expression, a determination she recognized from her own childhood when she had decided to ask the hard questions no one wanted to answer. Trump continued, his voice softer now, more personal. "I've learned that being in a position of power doesn't mean you have all the answers. Sometimes it just means you have more people asking you questions you don't know how to answer." He paused again, and his eyes found Emma's once more. There was something about this small girl in the front row, the way she was listening so intently, that made him want to speak more honestly than he usually did at these events. "The truth is," he said, now speaking directly to Emma, though the entire crowd was listening, "some of the biggest questions in life don't have easy answers, and some of the most important answers come from the smallest voices." This was the moment Emma had been waiting for without realizing it. Something about his words, about the way he seemed to be speaking directly to her, gave her the courage she had been searching for. Before her grandmother could stop her, before she could second-guess herself, Emma raised her small hand high above her head. The crowd noticed immediately. Secret Service agents tensed, but Trump held up a hand to indicate everything was fine. He had seen the little girl's gesture, and something about her earnest expression made him curious rather than concerned. "Yes, sweetheart?" he said, pointing to Emma with a gentle smile. "Do you have a question?" The crowd fell silent, thousands of eyes turning to focus on the small figure pressed against the metal barrier. Emma felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, but the look of encouragement in Trump's eyes gave her the strength to speak. "Mr. President," she began, her voice small but clear in the sudden quiet, "I have a really important question, and no one seems to know the answer." Trump nodded seriously, as if she were a fellow world leader rather than an 8-year-old girl. "What's your question, honey?" Emma took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. This was her chance, her moment to ask the question that had been tearing at her heart for months. Around her, the crowd waited in respectful silence, sensing that something special was about to happen. "Why doesn't God answer my prayers?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the silent square. "I've been praying for my mommy to get better, but she's still sick, and I don't understand why God won't help her." The question hung in the air like a delicate bird, beautiful and heartbreaking in its simplicity. Trump's expression changed completely, the politician's mask slipping away to reveal something far more human underneath. In that moment, he wasn't the President of the United States. He was just a man who had been asked one of the most profound questions possible by a child who deserved an honest answer. For several long seconds, the entire town square remained silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Trump stood behind the podium, clearly moved by Emma's question. The cameras that had been focused on him now turned toward the small girl at the barrier, but Emma barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment, to this chance to finally get an answer to the question that had been haunting her dreams. Trump walked away from the podium, something he never did during public appearances. His security details shifted. Nervously, but he waved them back with a subtle gesture. He approached the barrier where Emma stood, her small hands still gripping the metal rail, her dark eyes wide with hope and fear. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, crouching down so he could meet her eyes at her level. "Emma Martinez," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper now that he was so close. "Emma," Trump repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "That's a beautiful name. And your mommy, she's sick?" Emma nodded, suddenly feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "She has cancer," she said simply, the word feeling heavy and dark in her mouth. "The doctors are trying to help her, but she keeps getting sicker, and I don't understand why my prayers aren't working." Trump was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Behind him, the crowd waited with unusual patience, as if they too understood they were witnessing something important. News cameras continued rolling, but the atmosphere felt intimate despite the hundreds of people watching. "You know, Emma," Trump began slowly, "I've asked that same question myself. Maybe not in the same words, but I've wondered why bad things happen to good people, why prayers sometimes seem to go unanswered." Emma's grandmother watched from behind her, tears already forming in her eyes as she recognized the genuine compassion in the president's voice. This wasn't a political moment anymore. This was simply a powerful man trying to comfort a frightened child. "When I was about your age," Trump continued, "my younger brother got very sick. I remember praying every night, just like you're doing for your mommy. I promised God I'd be good, that I'd do anything if he would just make my brother better." Emma's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this important man to understand exactly what she was feeling, but his words described her own nightly ritual perfectly. "And did God answer your prayers?" she asked quietly. Trump's expression grew even more gentle. Well, that's where it gets complicated, Emma. See, my brother did get better, but it took a long time. Longer than I wanted to wait. And during that waiting time, I learned something important about how prayers work. The crowd leaned in closer, drawn by the intimacy of the conversation. Even the reporters had stopped their usual chatter, recognizing they were witnessing something genuinely moving. Sometimes, Trump explained, God's answers don't come in the way we expect them to. When I was praying for my brother, I thought the only good answer would be for him to wake up completely healthy the next morning. But that's not what happened. Instead, we found the right doctors. We found treatments that worked. We found strength we didn't know we had. Emma listened intently, her young mind working to understand what he was telling her. But the most important thing I learned, Trump continued, was that sometimes God's biggest answer to our prayers isn't changing the situation. Sometimes it's changing us. Sometimes he's teaching us to be stronger, more loving, more grateful for every moment we have. But I don't want to be stronger, Emma said, her voice cracking slightly. I just want my mommy to be okay. Trump reached through the barrier and gently touched Emma's small hand with his much larger one. I know, sweetheart. I know that's all you want. And you know what? That's exactly what you should want. That shows what a good daughter you are. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, and Emma wiped her cheek with her free hand. But what if God doesn't make her better? What if the prayers don't work? This was the question Trump had been dreading, the one without an easy answer. He could have offered platitudes, empty reassurances that everything would be fine. Instead, he chose honesty. Emma, I can't promise you that your mommy will get better, he said softly. I wish I could, but that would be lying to you, and you deserve the truth. What I can tell you is this. Every prayer you say for your mommy is heard. Every single one. Emma looked up at him with questioning eyes, waiting for him to explain. Sometimes God says yes to our prayers right away. Sometimes he says yes, but asks us to wait. And sometimes he says no, but gives us something else instead. Something we didn't know we needed. Like what? Emma asked. Trump smiled, the first real smile he had shown since approaching her. Like making you stronger so you can help your mommy through this. Like bringing people into your life who can support your family. Like helping you appreciate every moment you have together in a way you never did before. Emma considered Trump's words carefully, her 8-year-old mind working to process this new way of thinking about prayer. Around them, the crowd remained remarkably quiet, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something sacred in the midst of what had started as a political rally. But Mr. President, Emma said, using his title with the careful respect her grandmother had taught her, how do I know if God is really listening? Sometimes when I pray, it feels like I'm just talking to the ceiling. Trump chuckled softly, not at her question, but at the honest way she expressed it. You know what, Emma? I've felt exactly the same way. There have been nights when I've looked up at the ceiling and wondered if anyone was really listening to me either. This admission surprised many in the crowd. They were used to hearing politicians speak with absolute certainty, not acknowledging their own moments of doubt and vulnerability. But then something happened that changed how I think about it, Trump continued. I realized that maybe I was looking for God in the wrong places. Maybe he wasn't going to write messages in the sky or speak to me in a booming voice like in the movies. Emma tilted her head, curious about where this was leading. Instead, I started noticing the smaller things. The way a friend would call right when I needed to talk to someone. The way the right doctor would appear when we needed help. The way strangers would show kindness when we felt most alone. Like you talking to me right now? Emma asked with the startling insight that children sometimes possess. Trump paused, genuinely surprised by her observation. Yes, Emma, exactly like me talking to you right now. Do you think it's just a coincidence that you got to ask me this question today? Emma shook her head slowly. I've been wanting to ask someone this question for months, and Grandma said we almost didn't come today because she was tired." Maria, standing behind Emma, nodded through her tears. It was true. She had almost decided to stay home and watch the speech on television instead. "So maybe," Trump suggested gently, "this conversation is part of how God is answering your prayers. Maybe he knew you needed to hear these words today. And maybe he knew I needed to remember them too." This thought seemed to comfort Emma, and she stood a little straighter. "Do you really think God hears all my prayers for Mommy?" "I don't just think it, Emma. I know it," Trump said with conviction. "And I'll tell you something else. I think your Mommy knows it too. I bet when she sees how brave you're being, how hard you're praying for her, it gives her strength to keep fighting." Emma's eyes brightened slightly. "Really?" "Really. You know what I think makes God happiest? When his children love each other the way you love your Mommy. When they take care of each other and pray for each other and refuse to give up on each other." The little girl seemed to absorb this, and for the first time since asking her question, she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile but genuine. "Mr. President, can I ask you one more thing?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Will you pray for my Mommy too? I think maybe if more people pray, God might listen better." Trump felt his own eyes beginning to water, and he had to clear his throat before responding. "Emma, I promise you that I will pray for your Mommy every single night." "What's her name?" "Isabella. Isabella Martinez." "Isabella Martinez," Trump repeated solemnly. "I'll remember that name, and I'll ask God to watch over her and help her doctors take good care of her. And I'll keep praying too," Emma said with renewed determination. "Even when it feels like talking to the ceiling." "Especially then," Trump agreed. "Because sometimes when it feels hardest to pray, that's when we need it most." By now, there wasn't a dry eye in the front rows of the crowd. Even some of the hardened Secret Service agents were discreetly wiping their faces. The news cameras continued rolling, but somehow the mechanical nature of the equipment seemed less intrusive, as if even the technology was respectfully documenting rather than intruding. "Emma, I want you to remember something," Trump said, standing up but keeping his attention focused on her. "You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. It takes real courage to ask the hard questions, and it takes even more courage to keep hoping when things seem dark." "I don't feel very brave," Emma admitted. "That's exactly what makes you brave," Trump replied. "Brave people aren't the ones who never feel scared. Brave people are the ones who feel scared but do the right thing anyway. And loving your Mommy the way you do, praying for her even when you don't understand why she's sick, that's the bravest thing anyone can do." Emma beamed at this, standing even taller now. The crushing weight of her unanswered question hadn't completely disappeared, but it felt lighter somehow, more manageable. "Will you tell Mommy that the President is praying for her?" Emma asked. "You can tell her yourself," Trump said with a smile. "And you can tell her that she raised an amazing daughter who asked one of the most important questions I've ever heard." As Trump prepared to return to the podium to finish his rally, something unexpected happened. Emma, emboldened by their conversation and filled with a gratitude she didn't quite know how to express, did something that would be replayed on news channels for weeks to come. She reached into her small jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn from handling, the creases soft from being opened and closed countless times. With careful deliberation, she held it out toward Trump. "What's this, sweetheart?" he asked, accepting the paper gently. "It's a picture I drew of my Mommy," Emma explained. "I carry it with me everywhere. She gave it to me before her last surgery and told me to keep it close to my heart so she'd always be with me." Trump unfolded the paper carefully, revealing a child's drawing in bright crayons. The figure was unmistakably meant to be a woman, with long dark hair and a bright smile. Around the edges, Emma had drawn hearts and flowers, and in careful 8-year-old handwriting, she had written, "I love you, Mommy," at the bottom. "This is beautiful, Emma," Trump said, genuinely moved by the simple artwork. "But why are you giving it to me? This is special. You should keep it." Emma shook her head with the decisive certainty that only children possess. "I want you to have it," she said, "so when you pray for her, you'll remember what she looks like when she smiles." The gesture was so pure, so unexpectedly generous, that Trump felt his composure finally crack. Tears that he had been holding back throughout their conversation began to flow freely. Here was this little girl, facing the possibility of losing her mother, and she was giving away her most precious possession to help him pray more effectively. "Emma, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll treasure it always." The crowd, which had been watching this exchange with growing emotion, began to applaud softly. It wasn't the usual thunderous political applause, but something gentler, more reverent. They recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of pure human connection that transcended politics and touched something universal. Emma's grandmother, Maria, had been crying steadily since the conversation began. But now she was smiling through her tears. She had raised Emma to be generous and kind, but she had never seen her granddaughter display such mature compassion. "Mr. President," Emma said, "can I give you a hug?" Without hesitation, Trump knelt down again and opened his arms. Emma squeezed through the gap in the barrier with the help of a Secret Service agent who was also wiping his eyes, and she wrapped her small arms around Trump's neck in a fierce hug. The image, the powerful leader of the free world embracing. A small girl who had just entrusted him with her most precious possession and her deepest fear, captured something that rarely appears in political photography. It showed vulnerability, genuine care, and the kind of human moment that reminds everyone watching why these connections matter more than any policy or platform. "Thank you for answering my question," Emma whispered in his ear as they hugged. "Thank you for asking it," Trump whispered back. "You've taught me something today, too." When they separated, Trump carefully folded Emma's drawing and placed it in his jacket pocket right over his heart. "This is going to travel with me everywhere I go," he promised her. "And every time I touch it, I'll remember to pray for your mommy." As Emma made her way back to her grandmother, Trump stood at the podium once more. But the prepared speech he had planned to deliver seemed suddenly inadequate. How could he return to talking about policies and politics after such a profound exchange? "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice still rough with emotion, "I came here today planning to talk to you about a lot of important issues. Jobs, the economy, our future as a nation. And those things are important. They matter tremendously." He paused, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the drawing in his pocket. "But sometimes a little girl asks you a question that reminds you what really matters most. Faith, family, love, the courage to keep hoping even when we don't understand why difficult things happen to good people." The crowd listened with unusual attention, sensing that they were hearing something different from the usual campaign rhetoric. "Emma Martinez just taught me something about prayer that I want to share with all of you," Trump continued. "She taught me that sometimes the most powerful prayers aren't the ones asking for specific outcomes. Sometimes the most powerful prayers are the ones that help us love each other better, support each other more, and refuse to give up on each other no matter what challenges we face." He looked directly at Emma, who was now standing beside her grandmother, still clutching her small American flag. "Emma, you asked me why God doesn't answer your prayers. I think He does answer them. I think He answered them today by giving you the courage to ask your question, by surrounding you with people who love you, and by reminding all of us what real faith looks like." The applause that followed was unlike anything typically heard at political rallies. It was softer but deeper, filled with genuine emotion rather than partisan enthusiasm. People weren't just clapping for a candidate, they were acknowledging a moment of authentic human connection that had touched everyone present. 3 months later, Emma Martinez sat in a hospital room that had become as familiar as her own bedroom. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and drawings from her entire third-grade class covered every available surface. Balloons bobbed near the ceiling, and the windowsill was crowded with flowers from neighbors, friends, and even some strangers who had seen the news coverage of her conversation with President Trump. But Emma's attention was focused entirely on the woman in the hospital bed, who was sitting up for the first time in weeks, color returning to her cheeks, her dark hair beginning to grow back in soft patches after months of chemotherapy. "Tell me the story again, mija," Isabella Martinez requested with a weak but genuine smile. "Tell me about the day you talked to the president." Emma grinned, settling more comfortably in the chair beside her mother's bed. This had become their routine over the past few months. Emma would recount every detail of that October afternoon in the town square, and each time she told it, both mother and daughter found new meaning in the experience. "Well," Emma began, just as she always did, "I was scared to ask my question because I didn't think anyone would understand. But when I looked at his eyes, I could tell he had asked the same question before." Isabella nodded encouragingly. The doctors had told them just yesterday that her latest scans showed remarkable improvement. The experimental treatment that had become available through a research program, a program Isabella might never have qualified for if a certain phone call hadn't been made from the White House to the hospital's administration, was working better than anyone had dared to hope. "And then what happened?" Isabella prompted, though she knew every word by heart. "Then he told me that God answers prayers in different ways than we expect," Emma continued. "He said sometimes God changes the situation, and sometimes he changes us instead." "And what do you think now?" Isabella asked. "Do you think God answered your prayers?" Emma considered this seriously, as she always did. Over the past 3 months, she had thought about this question almost every day. The answer had grown and changed as she had. "I think he answered them in lots of ways I didn't expect," Emma said finally. "Like bringing Dr. Williams to our hospital right when we needed her most. Like all the people who started helping our family when they saw the news story. Like how you and me got closer because we weren't afraid to talk about the scary stuff. Anymore." Isabella reached out and took her daughter's hand. "What else?" "Like how I'm not afraid to ask big questions anymore," Emma added. "And like how I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Through the hospital room window, they could see the town square where everything had started. The campaign banners were long gone, replaced by Christmas decorations that sparkled in the winter sunlight. Life in Cedar Falls had returned to its normal rhythm, but something had permanently changed for the Martinez family. Emma pulled out a letter that had arrived just that morning, postmarked from Washington, D.C. She had received several letters from the White House over the past months, but this one was different. It was written in the president's own handwriting rather than typed by a secretary. "Dear Emma," she read aloud to her mother, "I wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I've been praying for your mommy every single night, and I carry your beautiful drawing with me everywhere I go. My staff thinks I'm crazy for keeping a crayon drawing in my jacket pocket during important meetings, but I tell them it reminds me what's really important." Isabella smiled, imagining the scene of world leaders gathering around a conference table while the President of the United States carried her daughter's artwork close to his heart. Emma continued reading. "I heard from the doctors that your mommy is getting better. I'm so happy about that, Emma. But I want you to know that even if the news had been different, your prayers were still answered. They were answered in your courage, in your love, in your refusal to stop hoping. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I realized you taught me something I had forgotten. You reminded me that the most important job any of us has, whether we're presidents or parents or kids, is to love each other better. You're doing that job perfectly." The letter concluded, "Thank you for asking me the hard question, Emma. Thank you for trusting me with your drawing. And thank you for showing me what real faith looks like. Your friend, Donald Trump. P.S. I'm still carrying your picture, and I still pray for your mommy every night. Emma folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. These letters had become treasures to her, not because they came from someone famous, but because they reminded her that her question had mattered, that her voice had been heard. You know what I learned, Mommy? Emma said, settling back in her chair. I learned that God always answers prayers. Sometimes he says yes right away, sometimes he says wait, and sometimes he says no but gives us something different instead. But he always, always listens. Isabella squeezed her daughter's hand. And what did he give us? Emma thought for a moment, looking around the hospital room that had been filled with so much love and support over the past months. He gave us each other. He gave us people who care about us. He gave us doctors who don't give up. And he gave us the kind of love that makes us brave enough to keep hoping even when we're scared. Outside the window, snow began to fall softly on the town square, covering the place where a little girl had asked a big question and received an answer that changed not just her understanding of prayer, but touched the heart of a nation. See, drawing she had given away still traveled in a president's pocket, but Emma had learned she didn't need to carry it anymore. The love it represented was always with her. In every prayer she whispered, in every moment of hope she chose over fear, and in every day she got to spend with her mother who was getting stronger. Emma Martinez had asked why God didn't answer her prayers, and in the end, she discovered he had been answering them all along, just not in the way she had expected, but in the way she needed most.